Hi, welcome to Asian American Life. I'm your host, Ernabelle DeMillo. In this episode, we take a look at movers and shakers in education, politics, and history. And if you want more information on our show, be sure to like our Facebook page at Asian American Life. Now, here's a look at what's ahead. Affirmative Action, Paul Lin looks at the ongoing controversy with Asian American college admissions. Race to the Top, Minnie Rowe reports on political candidates. Kyung Yoon looks at the first Sikh American exhibit in honor of September 11th. And Forgotten Heroes, how Filipino migrant workers changed American history. This and more on Asian American Life. All across the country, the issue of race-based admission and the recent Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action is a hot-button issue. So what does this mean for Asian Americans? Here's more.
I'm Paul Lin. Supporters of affirmative action called it a major victory when the Supreme Court upheld a college admissions practice that considers race as one factor in admitting students. Supporters say it shows that students of color matter on college campuses.
There is still a value to creating an even playing field and equal opportunity for students who have been historically marginalized and disadvantaged to be able to access higher education.
It was the second time in almost a decade that the Supreme Court has heard this case, known for its white plaintiff Abigail Fisher. She was denied a chance to continue a family legacy at the University of Texas at Austin. Her lawsuit alleged racial discrimination.
Abigail Fisher's race, white, was held against her, whereas other students, even though they had lower test scores, lower class rank, the fact that they had race in their favor allowed them to get in instead of Ms. Fisher.
For Asian Americans, the Fisher case became a hot topic. When polled, Asian Americans largely support the consideration of race in college admissions. One recent survey found 70% in favor of affirmative action in higher education. At the same time, the Fisher case struck a chord with other Asians angered by admissions policies that they believe use race as a means to establish quotas. Indeed, even before the Supreme Court ruled on Fisher v. University of Texas, the Asian American Coalition for Education launched a complaint against several Ivy League schools. AACE is made up of more than 130 Chinese, Indian, Korean, Pakistani, and Japanese organizations.
In this complaint, we request that the U.S. government initiate a civil rights violation investigation into the admissions process of Yale University, Brown University, and Dartmouth College.
AACE's complaint, like its 2015 action against Harvard, also argues that Asians are held to higher academic standards, citing data that suggest Asians must score 140 points higher on the SAT than whites, 270 points higher than Latinos, and 450 points higher than black applicants just to be in the running for placement at a private college. The cases allege that when universities consider race in college admissions, it discriminates against students who might otherwise merit entry. Why some Asian Americans would support the dismantling of affirmative action speaks more to their frustration that even with high qualifications, more Asians aren't getting into top schools. It's not that there aren't a lot of Asians getting into Ivy League schools. 27% at Columbia, 22% at Princeton, 21% at Harvard, and Asians make up less than 6% of the U.S. population. The argument? That Ivies in particular limit the number of Asian Americans despite their accomplishments.
I do not believe that highly selective colleges have quotas for admissions, but that doesn't mean that when they're not reading your application that they're not judging one Asian applicant against the next.
How colleges view Asian Americans as a demographic is more the issue, so says Hallie Potter, a fellow at the nonprofit public policy think tank, the Century Foundation. Affirmative action, she says, remains important for diversity.
It's not a uniform experience, and in fact, I think if colleges worked more on some of those nuances, there would be a real opportunity to boost representation for certain Asian American groups on campuses.
Just 6 of the biggest Asian groups make up 85% of the Asian American population: Chinese, Filipino, Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese. But it's the Census Bureau's other category that yields a wealth of diversity that colleges may miss when considering applicants broadly as Asian American, whether Pakistani, Thai, Laotian, or Nepalese.
In fact, we know for a fact that students from, let's say, the Hmong American community or the Cambodian American community or from our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities continue to be disproportionately underrepresented in college admissions.
Higher ed has plenty more steps it can take to increase diversity, taking its cue from plans already in place at state schools that ban affirmative action and enroll roughly a third of all U.S. high school graduates. So-called percent plans guarantee admissions to top grads.
You have a mechanism now to both encourage students to apply from under-resourced high schools. They may never have sent a student from that high school to a selective flagship university before, but all of a sudden there's a guarantee that the top graduates from that school will be admitted to this public university.
Other ideas for increasing diversity, schools can consider an applicant's economic hardships. Such students typically are outnumbered 10-to-1 on campus by higher income students. Provide better financial aid and recruitment of underserved students. And why not drop admission preferences for wealthy alumni donors?
Legacy preferences that give a leg up in admissions to students whose parents or close relatives were graduates of the school. Those typically overwhelmingly benefit white and affluent students. And so as a result, they indirectly disadvantage many students of color and lower income students.
Given racial tensions on college campuses and cities across the country and the narrow victory for affirmative action in the Fisher decision, Hallie believes it's a smart time for schools to examine their admissions policies and diversity goals.
Our country is rapidly becoming a country with no racial majority. Students are going to be entering a workplace and a society that is incredibly racially and culturally diverse. And if they don't have the chance to navigate that in college, then they're not being as well prepared as they could be for the world that they're going to be entering.
More diversity on college campuses and anticipated changes to come for the admissions process, reflecting America's evolving demographics. I'm Paul Lin for Asian American Life.
I'm Minnie Rowe. Asian Americans are the fastest growing immigrant group in the country, making up over 5% of the national population. Yet when you look at the number of Asian Americans who are elected into office on the federal, state, and local levels, it's clear that they are still very much a minority.
When we think of Asian American leaders, these are some of the giants that spring to mind. Over the years, there's been a slow but steady increase of Asian American elected officials. But could 2016 finally be the year that Asian Americans shatter that glass ceiling? If there's any doubt about the rising political clout of Asian American Pacific Islanders, or AAPIs, you needn't look any further than the Democratic and Republican National Conventions in July.
I am Congresswoman Judy Chu.
I'm Congressman Bobby Scott.
I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng.
And we are all proud to support Hillary Clinton for President of the United States.
My name is Lisa Shen. I am Korean American, and I am very proud to be a supporter of the next President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
It's not surprising that the presidential candidates have been wooing the fast-growing power of the AAPI vote. The Asian American electorate is projected to double from 6 million to over 12 million in 2040. Despite this, there is a huge disparity between the percentage of AAPIs living in the U.S. and those who actually hold elected positions or enter politics as a potential career path.
As you can imagine, coming from immigrant communities, many folks are more concerned when they come to this country with establishing financial stability, for example. Being in public office, being involved in government is not a priority for them.
Jessica Lee is Director of Development and Special Partnerships at the New American Leaders Project, a nonpartisan organization that focuses on bringing immigrants into the political process. She says as New Americans, their term for immigrants, there are several perceived barriers that hold back someone who could potentially become a great leader.
If you've never seen anyone who looks like you sit in elective office, you may never imagine that's something that you could do.
The New American Leaders Project runs a program called Ready to Lead, which teaches immigrants the fundamentals of running for office. It emphasizes that rather than rely heavily on one's own ethnic group for support, candidates should focus on highlighting common experiences as an immigrant in this country to carry them across the finish line.
Our best spokespeople will be the people from our own community and the people who share our experiences. And then when you go talk to your elected official or you expect to hold your government accountable, you're not telling them what's the problem because they've experienced that and they know it. It was not many people there, but a great conversation. Okay.
A recent graduate of the program, 27-year-old Amy Chen, has plans to run for mayor in 2020, somewhere in Southern California, where she grew up, with eventual plans to run for Congress.
It taught us why it was so important for us to run as children of immigrants, as immigrant women, and why we were uniquely positioned to be public servants.
The big picture is we're trying to change the conversation. Who is American? Who gets to lead? Who does that role belong to?
And signs that this conversation is already rapidly shifting is apparent when you look at the numbers. In 2010, there were only 10 Asian Americans running for Congress. Fast forward to 2016, there are now 40, quadrupling in just several election cycles.
My name is Don Lee. I'm running for State Assembly. Great.
Don Lee is running for New York State Assembly in District 65 in Lower Manhattan. He boasts a rich political career, but until now, it was all behind the scenes, supporting 4 administrations over the course of 2 decades.
I have always interested in service to the community, and I was happy at that capacity, dealing with small businesses, transportation issues, housing.
Even with his inside knowledge of the political process, Lee says he was hesitant to throw his hat into the ring in the past, preferring instead to support others, like New York City Councilwoman Margaret Chin.
There are things that are much bigger than all of us, and to get representation, to me, is bigger than individuals fighting, if you will. So when she said that she is committed and focused to run, I believe at that time it's better for me to help support an Asian candidate.
So first time running for office and just tired of all the nonsense that we hear in politics.
The timing was finally right for Lee in this election year. The motivating factors were an open state assembly seat, coupled with a desire to bring transparency and reform to Albany. Most of all, he wants to change the process, making government more accessible to everyone and building the necessary pipelines to support aspiring politicians in the future.
I'm hoping that this election will energize people, will be a new beginning to really show that there are qualified candidates, that you don't need to have all the political backing to do this if you believe in what you're doing.
And in time, a new generation of Asian American leaders will emerge, one that will follow in the footsteps of the legends who paved the way. I'm Minnie Rowe for Asian American Life.
Years ago, the Sikh Coalition was launched soon after 9/11 in response to the rise in hate crimes directed against the Sikh community. Now, as we mark the 15th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, the coalition is launching a photo exhibit featuring Sikh Americans to help promote understanding of this misunderstood community.
I'm a Sikh, I'm a soldier, I'm proud to be an American, and I'm proud to serve my country.
Major Kamal Khalsi is a 4th-generation military man.
My father and grandfather were both in the Indian Air Force. My great-grandfather served in the Royal British Army. For us, it's a family family tradition, it's a legacy, and it's also part of who we are as members of the Sikh faith.
Really nice bunny hole up there. Yeah, I love that one.
Major Khalsi is one of 40 Sikh American men and women to be featured in the Sikh Project. It's the first photographic exhibit to showcase Sikh Americans, created by the renowned British photographers Amit and Naroop. Their first exhibit took London by storm, and now they're replicating that success in New York City with a free exhibition open to the public.
We need the American public to see pictures of Sikhs in turbans, serving the military, serving the police, just being artists and musicians, just being regular Americans.
This is important to a community that has struggled since 9/11 with being stereotyped as people who don't belong in America, and even worse, singled out as targets of bigotry and violence.
Yesterday morning, an Army vet and a member of 2 racist skinhead bands is alleged to have opened fire on worshipers at a Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, killing 6 and wounding 4.
The Milwaukee massacre happened at a Sikh temple. And so I ended up writing an op-ed piece for Seattle Times, basically saying, hey, we need a new American superhero who can be Asian, Black, Hispanic, Sikh, who's going to fight intolerance.
That's what led political cartoonist Vishwajit Singh to eventually don the costume of his alter ego, Captain America, with a turban, to champion understanding and dialogue.
I think you're too skinny to be Captain America.
Okay, but how about if I said my real strength is in my head, my intelligence?
Then I think you...
I can be Captain
yes,
America?
Yes.
I've found that cartooning and humor is one of the best ways to channel my frustration, and also connect with people and build bridges.
What's the first word that comes to mind when you see me?
Well, crazy's really boring.
Even those who disagree with me, who call me names, I'm willing to engage them with my humor and have conversation, and then hopefully they might end up seeing me slightly differently.
Please give him a great round of applause for his service to our great nation. Thank you, Major.
Major Khalsi made history when he became one of 3 Sikh officers to be granted a long-term religious accommodation by the Department of Defense to serve on active duty while wearing a turban under their helmet, keeping their uncut hair and beard in accordance with their Sikh tradition.
Sikhs had been serving honorably since the early 1900s, but it was a policy change in the early 1980s that created this issue for us, for our community. And since then, I was the first guy to get the accommodation in 2009 to wear my religiously mandated turban and beard. When the largest employer in the United States, that being the United States military, is somehow able to tell you that your appearance is unprofessional, that your appearance does not allow you to become a part of the great organization that the U.S. military represents, it makes you feel like an outsider. It makes you feel less American.
Major Khalsi trained as an emergency room doctor and deployed in 2011 to Afghanistan. There, he treated some of the bloodiest casualties of Operation Enduring Freedom and was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for valor.
None of the soldiers I took care of ever said, don't take care of me because you got a turban or beard, or hey dude, don't take care of me because you're a Sikh.
According to the Sikh Coalition, the divisive political rhetoric has launched an alarming spike in hate crimes directed at Sikhs and other Americans who are an easy target because of their different appearance.
It's difficult. It's difficult some days. When I see other Sikhs being attacked, or I see other Muslims being attacked, or I see any other minority being attacked for being different, it hurts, and it hurts because I know we're better than that as a country, as a community.
I've found more and more people feeling willing to look at me, tell me to go back home, calling me names. So I've seen that elevation of intolerance, and that frightens me.
One way to counteract the fear, stereotypes, and bigotry that can dehumanize a community is initiatives like the Sikh Project by the Sikh Coalition.
I mean, I firmly believe art in all its myriad forms, images, photo images, cartoons, films, they're powerful. That's partly why I felt like this is a great project to capture Sikhs, men and women in turbans, in their own fashion sense, with their own unique stories, to be part of this exhibit and say to other Americans, yes, you might see us all as a single group, and yeah, in a certain context we are, but then again, you might find that we actually have a lot in common as well.
Leaders of Sikh communities are looking forward to more exhibits that help to dispel stereotypes and showcase the rich and diverse contributions of Sikhs worldwide. I'm Kyung Yoon for Asian American Life.
Cesar Chavez is a well-known civil rights leader who fought for farmers' rights. But little is known about the Filipino Americans who also fought for fair wages and better working conditions. Here's more. On September 8, 1965, Filipino farm workers in Delano, California walked off the grape fields. They were fighting for better wages and conditions. What they didn't realize was they were making history, setting in motion one of the biggest strikes in California labor history, one that would ultimately lead to the creation of the United Farm Workers Union and make union leader Cesar Chavez a household name.
I think the media really kind of gravitated to Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and the Mexican elements of the union, and really didn't put a lot of attention on the Filipinos, which is unfortunate, because if it wasn't for the Filipinos walking off the fields, calling the strike on September 7th, and then going on strike the next day, September 8th, 1965, there would have been no United Farm Workers, there would have been no Delano Grape strike.
Don Mabalon, a history professor at San Francisco State University, is writing a book on Filipino labor leader Larry Itliong.
Both of my grandfathers came here in 1929, and they both became farm workers. They left a small town in the central Philippines called Numancia. And my mother's father, my father's father, both arrived in 1929.
They were a part of a wave of Filipinos who arrived in the 1920s seeking a better life. But they were met with discrimination and lack of job opportunities during America's Depression. So many found work in the farms, from the canneries in Alaska to the fields of Central California.
My grandmother worked in the fields, my mom worked in the fields, my dad worked in the fields.
After 50 years, Filipino farm workers are finally getting recognized for their contributions to the labor movement. They are the subject of the Emmy-nominated PBS documentary, The Delano Manongs, Forgotten Heroes of the United Farm Workers Movement, written and produced by Marissa Arroy.
When you make a film or a documentary like this, it comes from a personal place. It comes from wanting to explore more of your own history. For me, exploring my own history as a Filipino American. And when I discovered the story through the community, I just thought it was really important for people to know about these men who had sacrificed a lot, coming here to the United States to make a living, and then raising their voice to be part of this union.
I'm going to be very frank with you. I have all kinds of guts, I'm not scared of nobody. And I'm a son of a bitch in terms of fighting for the rights of Filipinos in this country.
Larry Itliong is one of the forgotten heroes. He, along with Philip Vera Cruz, organized the 1965 walkout.
They learned that America is the most modern country on earth. They go to the fields, and there are no toilets. There's no running water. They share water out of the same tin cup. Dozens of men, warm water from a tin cup, passing the cup around. No toilet paper. Brutal heat in the Central Valley. It can get up to past 100 degrees in April or May even. So absolutely brutal working conditions.
A couple weeks into the strike, Itliong convinced Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, who had been organizing Mexican and Mexican American workers, to join the strike, because the farmers were pitting the workers along ethnic lines, and he knew a united front would have more impact. The Delano grape strike lasted a long 5 years, finally settled after a consumer grape boycott. In 1970, the farmers signed a contract with the United Farm Workers. Cesar Chavez made history. Meanwhile, Itliang, who was the UFW's assistant director, and fellow Filipino leader Vera Cruz faded in the background.
You look at this history as farm workers, like farming, like that's not romantic, right? We want to hear about the people who become billionaires or like get on television and stuff. And so I think that's partly why it faded into history. But also, these were older men, even in the 60s, and they didn't last very long in our lifetime. And Larry Itliang, he died maybe 5 years after the union got this big contract that they wanted. So nobody was there to really tell their story.
50 years later, finally the Filipino farm leaders are finding their place in history. A middle school in Union City, California was recently named Itliang Vera Cruz Middle School. October 25th is now Larry Itliang Day in California, and the story of the Filipino farm workers will now be taught in California public schools. And there is, of course, a Roy's well-received documentary.
For my nieces and nephew to be able to see that film and to see their grandfather's friend, and to see people in Stockton celebrated, people from the Central Valley, celebrated. These very ordinary people who did extraordinary things. And for them to kind of think, these are my uncles, these are my grandparents, I can do extraordinary things too.
That's our show for now. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget, like our Facebook page at Asian American Life. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo. We'll see you next time.